Okay, welcome to the companion video to the 7A video. This is the second part of the lesson looking at the requirements for the comparative question in paper 2 of the new Edexcel 9-1 GCSEs. In this video we're going to look at how you provide extended comparative responses to question 7B. So the details of 7B then. 7B is always going to require you to comment on similarities and differences. The response you provide must include comparison and contrast, so that's different to 7A. The focus for the question of 7B will always be the similarities in the way that the ideas and the perspectives, so the thoughts and the feelings of the writers are conveyed to a reader through a shared subject, event or theme. In 7B you are asked to compare how the writers present their ideas and perspectives in terms of the specific language and structural devices they use when writing about their subject matter, when describing an event or conveying a theme or idea to us. Your response to 7B must be analytical and evaluative, and what you're analysing are the effects of specific language and structural devices within the two texts, and how you're sort of evaluating how those devices compare and contrast to one another. 7B is worth 14 marks. Okay, so the mark a minute rule means you've got 14 minutes to do this. Again, it tells you to use supporting evidence from both texts, and the key thing about 7B is that you must deal with both texts equally. One of the texts is always going to be slightly longer than the other one, but you can't just write lots about that longer text and then just include one or two bits from the shorter text. You have to give equal attention to both of the texts in your response. So you've got 14 minutes to provide this analytical, detailed, extended comparison. So what are the examiners looking for then in a good response to 7B? A PED essay. That's what they're looking for. A PED essay in which each of the paragraphs is linked and each paragraph deals with a particular specific similarity across the two texts. So in terms of structuring your PED essay, the point needs to be the identification of a specific language or structural device used in both texts, either in a similar way or in a contrasting way. The first bit of evidence needs to be from text 1, and it can be either a direct quote, paraphrasing or referencing. Okay, and then the explanation that you give of that piece of evidence needs to be how that particular device within the context of that specific text is showing something about the writer's feelings, their thoughts about their subject matter, the event, the theme, whatever it is that you're comparing and contrasting. In the development section of your PED essay, what you need to do is to provide a comparative or contrasting connective to signal to the examiner that you are now going to move on and provide some evidence from text 2 of the device, the language or structural device being used in text 2. Having provided that evidence, you then need to explain the way that device is used within that text to convey that writer's ideas and perspectives, and evaluate the similarity or the difference between the use of that device in text 2 and the way that it was used in text 1. Okay, and you just go through and provide a series of PED essays. Your evidence can be in the form of direct quotations, paraphrasing or references. You are expected to give equal treatment to both texts, and you are expected to consider both texts as whole text. So question 7 combines the skills that you've used in question 3 to analyse language and structure in detail, and the skills that you used in question 6 to evaluate a whole text. So they're looking for a PED essay that analyses and evaluates. So you're zooming in and backing off, and there's a mixture of close analysis and broad overview. All right. They do want to see comparative vocabulary in there. You have to show that you're aware of similarities and of differences in the two texts, and the way you do that is using words like similarly or in contrast, so that you're showing that you are considering and you're thinking in a kind of insightful way about the way these two texts work. Right, so generally, how do we respond to 7b? Again, go back and quickly skim and scan both texts, this time focusing on similarities and differences in the ideas and perspectives. All right. As you do so, highlight, underline, circle, just identify in some way examples of specific language and structural devices that you can use from text 1. For each of the devices you've identified in text 1, you need to identify an example of its use in text 2, which is either similar or different. Okay, so because obviously you've got to provide examples from both texts. Whilst you only have 14 minutes to answer 7b, it is a good idea to create a very quick plan, the kind of thing that I've shown you in other lessons that we've done. So create a spider diagram or a mind map plan or a bullet plan, so that you make sure you've got the evidence from text 1 and text 2. Because you've only got 14 minutes or 12 minutes once you've spent 2 minutes planning, in reality you're only going to be able to cover 3 or 4 similarities. You do need to cover similarities of language and structure, so it would be advisable to have maybe 2 language features and 2 structural features, okay, that you write about. When you start your response, try and start it with a single sentence overview that sums up the 2 texts, their aims, and the way they're presenting whatever aspect of sight has been specified in the question. Then you work your way through providing a series of linked PED paragraphs, and as with the evaluative response, you need to start at the beginning of these texts. You need to work your way through and deal with the text as a whole. So start with the evidence that you've seen from early on in the text, and then work through. And as I say, you're probably only going to manage to do 3 or 4 of these PED paragraphs in the time that's available. It is the quality of your analysis, not the quantity, that gets marked. So it is far better to provide 3 very detailed PED paragraphs with developed and sustained explanations of the effect of the device and comparisons of the device, than to provide 7 or 8 superficial ones that do little more than just list all the language and structural devices. The examiners will reward quality, they will not reward quantity and listing. Right, let's have a look at what an effective 7b PED paragraph looks like. This is the start of a response to 7b, so this isn't a whole response, but it's enough to give you a flavour of the kind of thing that you need to be providing. So the first thing to notice is that there is an introductory paragraph to this, because it is a formal essay, and that introductory paragraph summarises the way that the 2 texts present the shared theme. And the shared theme is a change of circumstances. That comes from the question. Remember to highlight and identify the keywords in the question so that your response is relevant to the question that has been set. We've referred to text 1 in there, and we've referred to text 2. Okay. When we get into the analytical PED paragraphs, you will notice that the PED paragraph starts with the word both, just like we did in response to 7a. The reason for doing this is that that signals to the examiner that you are comparing, you are considering both of these texts. Okay, and we're making a point here about a very specific language device. So we're writing about the tone, we're writing about humour, and we're suggesting that that's created through the use of colloquialisms. Okay, so we're using technical terminology, which is a requirement for this question, and we're being very specific and identifying specific language devices. We then provide some evidence from text 1, and again you need to make it clear which text you're writing about, so it's a good idea to use the term text 1 and text 2 or refer to the writers. The evidence in this case is a direct quotation which is short and has been embedded into the writing. And when we talk about embedding quotes, what that means is providing a short quotation that becomes part of the sentence. It doesn't interrupt the flow of the sentence, it doesn't trip up the meaning of the sentence, and you don't need to separate it from your own writing. It just literally embeds in and becomes part of what you're writing. Having provided that direct quotation, we then go on to give an explanation of the way that that piece of evidence is revealing the writer's perspective at this particular point. Okay, so we're commenting on the effect, we're showing an understanding of the effect of this particular device in this particular text to convey a specific writer's ideas and perspectives about this subject matter. All right, it is not enough just to identify examples of language and structural devices and talk generally about how those devices are used by any writer in any text. You have to be discriminating and focus on the way it's being used in the text you're dealing with. We then use a comparative connective. In this case, we're looking at something that's the same, so we're looking at similarities. So we've used the comparative connective similarly. Again, this is just signposting. This is what we refer to as signposting. So use of these words like both and the text, naming the text, and these comparative connectives signpost the examiner through your response. They can see that you're consistently comparing and contrasting. We then refer directly to text 2, so again another signposting to help the examiner out. And we refer, using the technical term, to the language device that we are writing about within this P paragraph. So this is showing the examiner that we are maintaining focus. We are still writing about the use of colloquialisms. We then give some evidence, again in the form of a very short quotation which is embedded, which helps to develop the point that humour is injected into what is otherwise quite a formal text through the use of these colloquialisms. And that explanation forms the end of the P paragraph. So in terms of how that breaks down, so the point is a similarity of specific language feature here, then some evidence from text 1, comparative connective, reference to text 2, evidence from text 2, and then an explanation of how that evidence is working within text 2. So you can see that the response to 7b needs to be much more detailed. It needs to be more technical in terms of the language you use and the effects that you are analysing in response to that. So 7a is testing skimming, scanning and information retrieval, and they're the same skills that are tested in the low scoring, the 1 and 2 mark questions on the paper. You just have to find some evidence and provide it. 7b is testing the skills that are assessed in question 3 and question 6. So analysis, the ability to identify and comment analytically on the effect of specific devices, and also the ability to evaluate, to take a broad overview. All right, so that is how you go about answering question 7, part A and part B.